welcome back to my channel. If you're joining us here live, comment in the chat box and let us know that you're here and say hi. If you're new here, I'm Vanessa. I am a YA fantasy, paranormal, and horror author and book publisher. And on my channel, I talk about books, writing, and all things related to storytelling. So today's live stream is part of a series that I do called Writing Diversely. This is a series I created to help writers learn how to write different diverse characters. So in today's live stream, I'm going to be here chatting with Mariela Diaz, and she is the founder of Awekids, which is an e-commerce business that promotes diversity and inclusivity for kids of all types of abilities. And so today we're going to be talking about neurodivergence, and in particular autism and ADHD. So Mariela, do you want to say hi and give an introduction for yourself?
Hi, Vanessa. Hello, everyone. My name is Mariela. I am a designer, illustrator, now an e-commerce entrepreneur. I've set up Awekids as a platform, really, to reach out to children, to reach out to them, to educate people on the topics of, disability and neurodivergence. Those are very important to me. And I think it's something that just, we're only just starting to learn more about and understand from an actual autistic or actual disabled person's point of view. So I think it's really important to have that out there for everyone to be educated on.
Yeah. Awesome. So I see a couple people here in the chat. Hi, Francisco, and Impish Misconception. Hi there. If you want to drop your name in the chat, feel free to do that as well. So before we get started, I want to start off with a disclaimer. This is something I say before all of my live stream interviews, but I want to just remind everyone that no group is a monolith. So Mariela is here graciously sharing with us her experience as someone who is neurodivergent. And hopefully this will help a lot of you who are writing characters like this as well. But keep in mind that her experiences do not speak for everyone who may be neurodivergent. So always make sure you do your research and definitely make sure you get sensitivity readers for your stories. So, and then the last thing, one other thing I wanted to mention is for anyone here watching today who is new, who may not be familiar with the term neurodivergent. Neurodivergent is a term for people whose brain function differently in one or more ways than what's considered typical. So it's kind of a broad umbrella term that encompasses autism, ADHD, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. So yeah, we can jump into some of the questions that I have now. So starting off, I wanted to ask, can you share with us a little bit about autism and ADHD?
Sure, Vanessa. So both really what they share in common is they are considered under, they're considered a disorder. So, which is highly contended in the neurodivergent communities because we don't really see them as a disorder. We see them more as a diversity, really. I mean, it's a neurological difference, like you mentioned. So that is something that people contend with, and I mean, what else can I say? They both develop in childhood, so they will be there from childhood. Sometimes they're not as evident, and that will be because of because autism is a spectrum. So some areas will be more delayed or more developed than others, and they also, because of the way that society, I guess, is constructed, it's also considered as a disability. It can be disabling in certain spaces and certain areas.
Right. Awesome. Thanks. We have one comment. Says, I'm autistic and I'm writing a romance novel with an autistic character in it, so I'm very interested in what you both have to say. Awesome. I am very interested in this topic as well. I have ADHD myself. I do not have autism, but my younger brother has autism and ADHD as well.
Yes, I have both as well, autistic and ADHD, inattentive. So ADHD can be, in two ways. It can be inattentive, as in like daydreaming and zoning out, and then you've got the hyperactive, which is probably the more noticeable one and the one that gets diagnosed most easily in children. But the most prevalent one, the one that occurs most often in women and in girls, is inattentive. So that one goes underdiagnosed.
Right. Which makes sense because a lot of it looks different as well for inattentive. I think most people think of ADHD and they think of, the little boys bouncing off the walls and all hyped up on sugar, which that's how it looks for my little brother, which is why I never realized I had it too until adulthood as well, because I'm more of the inattentive type as well. There is some of that hyperactivity, but it's presented in different ways, I feel like.
Yeah, I think, through steaming and possibly racing thoughts, a lot of ideas, a lot of things going on in your head. I think that's more, like an introverted way of showing the hyperactivity that goes on. But yeah, it also looks very different from boys to girls. So that's another reason why it's often not diagnosed with young girls and even women. So it's when we're talking about love and relationships and things like that, I think that is also very diverse. Autism is a spectrum. One person to the other will look very different. What we like. We have some common traits. But we're still individuals. And we are different. You have different backgrounds, different upbringings, different personality types. So it really is just like any other neurotypical person. You wouldn't be able to just pinpoint and be like, that's an autistic person right there.
Right.
unless sometimes you're neurodiverse yourself and you can sort of see traits that are similar, or often you are sort of attracted to the people who are also neurodiverse, even though you don't really know why.
Yeah. That's awesome. Can you share, like, I know we've said it looks very different person to person, but can you share what you think some of those common traits are in autism?
Sure. So there will always be the social aspect. You know, communication is often um, difficult. You know, the way we process things is diverse. So sometimes the way that we communicate doesn't necessarily uh, sort of align with our facial expressions or our tone of voice, or the way that we communicate is very direct and very honest and open, and often that is not something that is very welcome in, you know, in the social norms. It's not very accepted to be, you know, so blunt
Yeah.
or so direct, you know, so honest. And I think that is one thing that I really value um, from neurodiverse people, that we can just say what we mean and mean what we say, you know,
Hmm.
and don't have to worry about, you know, trying to be, um, you know, we try to be well mannered and whatnot. I think that's also just to show respect. But things like, you know, looking in the eyes, or things that are socially acceptable. Sometimes we don't necessarily abide by those same rules. We feel they're just very unnecessary, and so that can be difficult to navigate, especially because um, there's a lot of stigma as well around, you know, what autism looks like, and, you know, what an autistic person is meant to be like.
Yeah.
So that is something that, you know, I myself struggled with for a long time, because I didn't feel like I fitted in, and I just didn't quite understand social cues. You know, it's difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, that actually brings me to my second question that I had on here. Um, you know, since we're talking about how it's different for everyone, what has your experience been like, and what has autism and ADHD looked like for you?
Sure. So for me, it's always since I was young, feeling like I just didn't quite fit in. Like I, I just, everybody knew something that I had that I didn't know. It's like I don't know whether it's the socially awkwardness or the anxiety as well. A lot of anxiety around, you know, the right thing to do. A lot of steaming as well, which is quite common in a lot of neurodiverse people, is steaming, which is, you know, movement of, it could be, you know, it could be auditory steaming, it could be verbal steaming, visual steaming, um, physical steaming with your body, so rubbing fingers, moving legs, um, uh, fidgeting with things. So those things are probably the most obvious things that I've come to realize that I do a lot of.
Mm.
Um, and then there's, yeah, just the not quite fitting in, feeling a little bit like an alien or a mutant. So when I was younger, I used to turn a lot to Marvel and, you know, the X-Men, because they were different, but they just, you know, they knew who they were. And I think I struggled with that a lot for a long time, is really understanding who I was. And once I found out my diagnosis, it just felt like such a relief that finally I found my place, and I wasn't the only one.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of which, you're kind of just leading into my next questions, which is great. Because my next question was, I believe you had mentioned that on your site that your children were diagnosed first. Um, is that right?
That's correct, yes. And to be honest with you, it was all just from my own intuitiveness of like seeing that things weren't quite right, especially with homeschooling. Once I brought my kids back home, I could see that really the struggles that they had at school really weren't applicable during homeschooling. So I thought, okay, so it's not the work, it's not the school, it's something about the environment, something about how the teaching is being done, how their strengths are not really taken into account. So I need to work with them and not against them, and not in the same way that they would at school, because school is very structured, very,
Yeah.
it's not really for neurodiverse people, it's too boxed in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so my daughter had anxiety for at least 2 years. That was noticeable, you know, physical symptoms, stomach pain, and so much anxiety. School refusal. She didn't want to go to school. I didn't understand why. She had friends. She had a circle of close friends. She's like a very smart kid. So I just didn't know what the issues were, and a lot of them were just um, overwhelm and meltdowns and expectations, and uh, those things affected her for quite a while. And I took her to see, you know, the psychologist, specialists, the doctors. Nobody really could pinpoint, or they would just give me any other diagnosis but the one that, you know, that we really needed, which was we needed to know that she was neurodiverse and she had different needs to other children. So, you know, since then I just sort of bypassed the medical, the professionals in the medical field, and just gone with my gut and what I feel is best for my children, because, you know, not everybody has all the answers, but I know my children. And so going from there, I've actually had all of my children diagnosed, and they're all autistic, just as I perceived. And they all also have ADHD.
Okay.
And I have four children.
Oh.
Yeah. So the oldest one is 16. Then I have my daughter who's 13. Then I have another little boy, Max, who's 8. And the little one is 5, Matthias. So, you know, this, nobody said to me, look, we have an issue. You know, we're not seeing them developmentally growing. No, they're fine. They look like just any other child. You wouldn't know that they're neurodiverse, but I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's probably also because you know, you have it yourself, so you can see, you can pick up on those traits, like you were saying earlier.
That's right. And, you know, I think also coming from a neurodiverse family myself, my parents, and them not knowing, now I can see why everything seems so normal to me. You know, I was like, okay, well, we all steam, we all hum, we all sing, we all tap, we all, you know, do these quirky things that are not necessarily personality driven, but are more neurologically driven.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this happens all the time. What you said right at the beginning, I'm like, there was something else I was going to ask, and I lost that train of thought.
Yeah, it happens with ADHD a lot. So
Very much. Which I never knew that either until I was diagnosed myself.
that's right.
I just knew like it happens all the time. And before, when I worked in the counseling field, and I ran groups, my clients know I would tell them, like, I lose my train of thought at least once every group. So just expect that.
That's
Um,
right.
and I never knew why that was until I got diagnosed, and I was like, oh, now it makes sense. So, let's see, there was a couple comments I saw here. This isn't necessarily fiction, but this season of The Bachelor has a contestant with ADHD, and she got into a conflict with another contestant who got angry at her for not looking her in the eye.
Mm.
And this became a huge drama where that contestant mocked the idea of ADHD. Do you think it's responsible to have this used as a story in a reality show, or is it just a form of representation? Trying to understand I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question.
I think what I took from that question was if it's ethical to show this kind of representation. I think probably The Bachelor isn't like the best place to show this kind of representation. Similar to another show, I think that's called Love on the Spectrum. Now these shows are made to get the viewers to have a reaction. Whether it's positive or negative. It's still playing into their biases. It's not really educating them on anything. So do I think it's helpful in any way or educative? No, I don't. Educational. It's not really necessary because the context that it's in. So it's going to be more drama and is she rude? Is she, judgments around her behavior. So I don't think it's helpful.
Yeah.
And this is exactly why this is also done, in real life, like at schools with children, where the teachers will be like, well, look me in the eye when you're speaking to me, or all eyes on me. It's like a game. They make it into a game. And children who, are inattentive, children who are hyperactive, children who are, ADHD, children who are autistic, don't necessarily need eye contact to listen. And this is why last year I prepared a little activity that could, potentially be used at schools and which has been used by psychologists, therapists, and all of that, which addresses this very, very thing, which is, eye contact and the way that we listen, because at school they push a lot of the hands-on, hands-on lab and sitting up straight and looking at the teacher and all these rules around what listening looks like. But that's what listening looks like for neurotypical children.
Right.
So I developed my way of listening. I don't know if you can see it there.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So it talks about, what listening would look like for neurotypical children. And not just neurotypical children, disabled children as well, So it's just a way of educating adults, really, because to be honest with you, we are probably the ones that need the most education on these topics.
Yeah.
Children are very accepting. Children are very flexible and very open. So it's a way of getting it in there for the children, but really for the adults.
And I think also it's, we have to remember that one, everyone is different, and you can't really expect, something to look, you can't expect everyone to look the same when it comes to, making eye contact and how they listen. But also, too, there's also a cultural factor that I don't think people take into account. There are some cultures where it's disrespectful to look someone in the eye, and that's a sign or form of aggression. And so I think, we need to realize there are cultural differences, there are neurological differences, there are all sorts of differences, and we can't expect people to present or look the same as everyone.
That's right. The differences, just as many differences we have on the outside, they're also on the inside. And I think, tolerance, compassion, kindness, and all of those, awesome values that we as a society value. We should really apply that to every scenario, and especially to children. Children are, can go through the school system and go through a lot of trauma, complex trauma. And so we need to be aware that our actions and the way that we treat children will have a long-term, impact. So it's really important, especially for educators, to look into these things and not just think that because the way things are is the way that things should always be and should stay. And I myself am studying currently to be a early childhood educator for the same reason, because I want to get in there. I want to make a difference, at least help educate the educators on what that looks like.
Yeah. And then the other thing I also wanted to add to this question here was, you brought up The Bachelor. These reality shows, of course, they are created for drama. So, of course, they're going to play things up and make things, more dramatic. I think in a story setting, if you're writing a fictional story, whatever the conflict or situation is in the story, I would just think about what is the purpose, and like what do you want the reader to get from that? What are you hoping to have them understand through this interaction, is something I would think about. So let's see. So my next question was, so I know your children's diagnosis is also what led you to get your diagnosis. So what was that like, realizing, you for the first time? Like, I know you mentioned a little bit where it was like, it makes sense, like everything finally felt like you figured out why this was like this, but can you kind of expand a little on that and like share how it felt, just like going through your whole life not knowing you had this uh, disability, or whatever word you want to use it, and then finding out you do, what that meant for you?
Sure. So for me, it meant I really embraced it as a part of me. And I think, a lot of people who are not autistic usually would refer to autism as something separate, a disorder, something separate from the person. But the reality is we cannot separate ourselves from our autism. It is part of us. It is our neurological wiring. It's our brain differences. You can't possibly, I can't detach my brain and be like, okay, I'm not autistic anymore. It's just not going to happen. And no matter, there are no treatments for autism either. So nor would I want there to be. I actually love the way that I am. I love the way that I think. I love the way I embrace everything, the good and the bad, the difficult and the amazing things that I can do. At first it was no, you have sort of like a denial phase where you're like, no, that it can't possibly, I can't not possibly be autistic because of all the stigma, right? The stigma, the biases, the current representation that's out there of autistic people, like that you're either some sort of gifted child prodigy or you are, just you're not capable of empathy, or you're cold and you are maybe you might have a comorbid condition, which is, learning difficulty or learning disability. And so therefore you either just are totally out of, not connected to the world, or you are just super bright and super, like this superhuman. And I just didn't fit into either one of those categories. So I thought, well, I couldn't possibly be autistic. But the more I learned, the more I informed myself. I just knew it. I didn't need the diagnosis. I went through the diagnosis to show my children what it looks like, what it can be like, with, I think somebody was writing a romance novel. And a lot of people think that autistics cannot possibly feel anything. They cannot get married. They cannot feel love. It's not true. I have 4 children. I love my children to death. I love all children. Actually, that's probably one of the biggest autistic traits, is loving like animals and loving the planet, and having, children having this empathy and this drive and vision to want to make things better and just in the world. So it's totally the opposite of what people think. And that is the reason why I'm here today. That is the reason why I put myself out there, because I'm actually a very private person. But I think this just needs to be everywhere now, and we all need to stop with the stigma, stop with the stereotyping, and move on from there. And, talk to actually autistic people who, have lived experience, who know what's going on, and who can share that with the world, and make everything more inclusive for, generations to come, so they don't have it as hard as I did, because you struggle to belong, and nobody should have to go through that.
Yeah. Awesome. So let's see. So do you think that your life would have been different, or would have looked different, if you had gotten diagnosed much earlier as a kid? And if so, what do you think would have changed?
I think self-acceptance, self-esteem. Like I said to you, knowing that I belonged somewhere, knowing that there were other people like me going through the same thing, the same struggles, because it's not all, as much as I have talents, for me, they're shown in a way that's, my creativity. There's also struggles, the fitting in, the knowing what the social, relationships can be difficult as well, because of trust and anxiety and lots of other comorbid conditions. But, reaching out and finding your people, and knowing that there are other people like you that also struggle with those things, it just makes it so much easier. And I think that is the reason why also I had all of my children diagnosed, and I've told all of them, that they are autistic, that they have ADHD, so that they can feel proud of who they are, and they can know themselves and teach others. And they don't feel the shame or the stigma of, what society wants them to feel. There's no right or wrong way of being, and autism and ADHD is no different to, to your ethnicity, your, I'm Chilean by birth, and I'm not embarrassed by that. And I am also autistic, and I am not embarrassed by that.
Awesome. So do you, I know, speaking of not being embarrassed and being proud of, having autism and ADHD and all that, do you, I know for a lot of people with ADHD and autism, they may mask a lot.
Yes.
Um, and so I guess I'm wondering, is that something you've had to do as a kid growing up, or something you do now, even, or do you just not mask at all?
Yeah, so I think I did that a lot growing up, especially, through teenage years where you sort of, you know, are sort of pushed towards, belonging into a certain group, or, having certain likes, or having special interests, which were never compatible, really. I just didn't, I didn't really like boys till I was like 16. And I, I I just was not into the things that typical teenage girls would be into. I just didn't really care about makeup or fashion or all those things. I was more concerned about, my integrity and my values and my morality, and, helping others and all those sort of things, where the other girls were like, "What do you mean? Like, just come out partying." I'm like, "No, it's not my scene." I mean, I love music and I love going out, but it's not the only thing. I'm not just this, on the inside, I'm like a totally different person. And sometimes I do find myself having a type of dissociation. So not really, I look myself in the mirror and I'm sort of like, is that really me? Because I feel different on the inside.
Hmm.
Um, but what was the question again? It happens.
Yeah, just about masking. If
Yes, yeah,
whether you mask uh,
yeah.
growing up.
So yeah, I think, those were the hardest years. I had to mask, but I tried not to. So then I became very introverted and just into my little world. Um, but um, now that I know my diagnosis, I don't mask at all. I actually am very openly steaming, during school council meetings, or anything related with, with adults, where you think, oh, okay, I got to be on my best behavior, but I actually am just on my behavior, on my terms. And if anybody is bothered by it, I will just let them know that I'm autistic and steaming for me, or whatever the behavior is. That's normal for me, and that I don't need to conform to societal standards of what that looks like, of what I should be like.
Yeah,
Yeah, and masking is a big issue. It's because sometimes you might have to do it for work, or you might have to do it, at certain times where it's important to maintain your composure, or some sort of um, standard, I guess, societal standard that's expected, an expectation. There's an expectation there. But for us, it works counterintuitively, where it causes more anxiety for us to act that way. So therefore, it's not really in benefit of, what we can give, what we're able to do. If all we are being judged on is how we present ourselves. We have so many talents, but sometimes those are covered up by masking.
yeah. Um, let's see. I had seen two more comments here. And Fish said, as an autistic adult, I am constantly compared to Sherlock Holmes, Sheldon Cooper, or Spock and Data, even though I'm nothing like those people. Well,
No.
I have also been told that no one will possibly love me because I'm autistic, and I've been told that if I ever want to experience romance, that I will have to hide it, just not be autistic anymore. Yeah, that's. I'm sorry anyone has ever told you that. They are very wrong. Um, And, I like what, you were saying that earlier, Mariela, how like people think autistic people can't uh, have romance or love in their life, but that's absolutely not true.
That's right. That they can't hold down relationships, or they cannot be empathetic enough to relate to somebody else. But you'll find the more you are yourself, the more, let's say, autistic you are, or the more neurodiverse you are, the more you will attract the people who are genuinely interested in you and who are also like you. Myself, my husband is also ADHD, even though he didn't know it. I didn't know it either. But we get along, great. So once we got married, our children were neurodiverse, and we're just all have a way of showing our love and communicate in different ways, but we're still able to love each other and share in things and communicate and have a wonderful laugh. And um, you know 20 years married is, I think, a testament to that. To being able to have a relationship, to have commitment and all those wonderful things. And autistic people are very, I find, in my personal experience, we have a lot of morality and values, and at the end of the day, that's all that matters. What society thinks you can and cannot do, you can't let anybody define that for you. you know um, I've fallen in love twice now, and it's also with another neurodiverse person. So it's um, you will just find your people. My best friend is also, going through the testing phase as well for ADHD. So I think all the people that I have attracted, because I've been myself, are also neurodiverse people, and we all just get each other. It's just so much easier without having to pretend and mask. You just be yourself. The
Yeah,
right people will come in time.
yeah, definitely agree. Um, okay, so my next question was, let me see. Um, oh, yeah. So my next question was, so you're an entrepreneur and a mom of four, which has its own challenges there. So how has your autism and ADHD impacted your work and your parenting?
Mm. I think they always add. It always adds to everything in my life. That's why I'm so. I wouldn't want it any other way. I wouldn't not want, if there was a cure, I would not want it. I would not seek it. I would not support it. Um, it just adds that little bit of spice to my life. It's difficult. It is tricky, and it can be challenging, and it's all the things. It's all the things. It's the good. It's the bad. It's life. But at least it's fun. It's always fun. I always try to make it fun for the kids. I like to joke around a lot, and just taking things one day at a time. And I think it's managing expectations and managing the anxiety, which really helps. Because I want to be there for them. I want to be present for them. So um, I've tried to stop with a lot of the overthinking, which is quite common in people who are neurodiverse. We tend to think of 1,000 possibilities. That's also because our brain is wired in a way that we have abilities of lateral thinking, so it's thinking sideways, not just stuck in one way. So we can come up with a billion ideas. Sometimes, because due to executive dysfunction, we just don't always execute on those ideas. So lots of shiny things, lots of ideas, lots of, wanting to do this, wanting to do that, but executive dysfunction is a big one, where we just don't complete things. We don't always go to the end, and we lose motivation. Some of us, especially, people with ADHD, need the dopamine, the hit of like this new and innovative thing, and then when the interest wears off, it's kind of sort of like, oh, okay, well, I'll just move on to the next thing that will give me the dopamine hit and make me happy and excited.
Yeah.
So those are challenges, definitely. Being consistent, disciplined as well. I can hyper focus. That's really cool. Like I can just do one thing for hours on end. But if the focus is not there, I'm just all over the place.
Yeah.
Or the interest. Sometimes I'm just more motivated by, how interesting the topic it is to me, is
Mhm.
how much effort I will put into it.
Yeah. And I think it also depends on, some of it is timing as well, because this is why I said, in the ADHD group, I had commented that it should be called Shiny New Project Syndrome, because
That's right.
that's totally what it is. I'm like, oh, now I'm interested in this. Let me go do this for a while.
Yeah,
Um,
and look, that makes, that keeps life interesting. That's part of the pros, but also the cons of having a neurodiverse brain. But you've just got to take the good with the bad. I think I just definitely wouldn't want it any other way. That's all. That's
yeah,
to me. That's at the end of the day. That's what it comes down to. And there are challenges, definitely, but most of us challenges can be accommodated, like you say. It just depends sometimes on, your mood. It will depend on, what's going on around you, your environment,
yeah,
the expectations that you
yeah,
put on yourself and the expectations others put on you.
yeah,
So if you can manage some of that, that would take away some of um, the negative things that, can affect your life, can affect your relationships, can affect the way you view life, the way you live life.
yeah, yeah. And when I was saying with the time part of it, is like, also I've realized something, is that, you know how you were saying, it's also very interest based, and it is, and it's interest based, also dependent on time, because I'm realizing that there are some things that, I they taught us in school, but because I was not interested in learning it at that time in school, my brain did not remember it, had a very hard time learning it and trying to grasp it. But now, I found that there have been times now where I have a sudden interest in the topic that I tried to learn in school. And now I can pick it up way quicker and understand it much better. And I'm like, I thought I was bad at science. I thought
Yeah,
I just didn't understand it. But no, I just wasn't interested at that time. But now that I am, I understand it a lot better.
that's right. So it's important to work with our strengths and work within our, like for example, a lot of people with ADHD struggle with sleep, right?
Hmm.
It's just because our circadian rhythms are actually different. So neurotypical people will, feel tired and sleepy, around, 9 till 7, 9 till whatever, your 8 hours. But our sleep cycle is actually later, so we get sleepier and tired later on. So when you're looking at, 2 o'clock in the morning till, 10. So we have to work with our bodies, with our neurology, to get the best outcome. If we're expecting the same outcome as somebody who's neurotypical, who, doesn't get overwhelmed, doesn't have so many sensibilities, you cannot have that same expectations of yourself. You may need a shorter work cycle, or a more frequent one but with shorter periods of time, or if you can hyper focus for a really long time, then maybe that's helpful to you, but it will be dependent on various things. So
Yeah.
it's important to keep that in mind and not to be too hard on yourself if you cannot do a specific thing that others find easy. It's just the way that it is, and you will have your own talents and your own strengths.
Yeah. So let's see here. So I wanted to ask, now I know you can't speak for your kids' experience, but do you think you can share like what ways you think your autism and ADHD looks the same as your kids and what ways it looks different?
Sure. So some very, I guess, common areas are, the social awkwardness, the anxiety, around having interactions with larger groups of people, of meeting new people, of changing routine. That's also another big thing. If there's too much going on as well, sensory sensibilities, overwhelm, meltdowns. Those can be quite challenging at times if you don't know what the source is or what it looks like. If you weren't diagnosed and you were having meltdowns, um, it's quite jarring. But once you know how to manage it, once you know what it is, you will have way more compassion for your children and for others who go through those things. These things can lead to chronic conditions as well. So you really want to keep the stress and the anxiety down, because over time it's going to affect you in your health. So I try with the kids to you know to be compassionate with themselves, to not be so hard on themselves. They have the perfectionist gene, which is part of the part of autism, is being just really wanting to do things the right way, doing the right thing all the time. I get that a lot from them. But that puts a lot of pressure on them. Even though I don't put pressure on them, they feel that they need to go out of the way to excel, in what they do. So those things really, really were things that I could identify with as a child as well. The need to just always be perfect, always do the right thing, be, you know, um, apart from the steaming and the all of that, I love organizing things. That's just one of those things. I think it's part of as well of a little bit of OCD that comes with the autistic traits. So I love, sorting things or putting things in colors, or you do the M&M things or the Skittles, and you sort of do that, or the Legos, and I'm constantly seeing the kids like sorting things in colors or shapes, or lining them up, and um, it's little things sometimes, but it's also the bigger, more complex issues that take a bit more time to work around. My daughter has a lot of executive dysfunction around tidying up her room, like little things like that you would think, well, it's just, you could put the rubbish away, like as or the dishes in the sink. But for her, it's really difficult. It's really difficult. And I have to be really compassionate and understand that it's might be easy for me, might be easy for everybody else, but for her it's a struggle, and just give her a little bit more. Sometimes assist, sometimes just understand that it's a bad day, and we could try again another day. That's okay. My son, who's 16 now, in high school, and he has trouble getting organized. He's constantly like leaving things to the very last minute, finishing off assignments like the day before due. He's not quite sure. He'll try to plan things out, but he just never ever works out the way that he plans it. And those are little things that, yes, they affect him, because the expectations placed on him from school are very high, and so they think, well, you're 16 now, you're able to do this, this, and this, and so you should be able to manage. But because of his executive dysfunction, it's hard for him, and he feels sometimes, like a failure. Like, why does everybody else know, oh, I can do this, and why can't I, So
Yeah.
those things affect self-esteem as well. So I'm constantly having to prop them up and just getting them to work with their strengths and not worry about everything else. Everything else can be sorted out, you know, in life as we go,
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so speaking of this, it sounds like you have some tools and stuff that you use to kind of help you with the ADHD and autism to manage it. But do you use any sort of medication or any other therapies to treat your ADHD or autism?
So with autism, there is no treatment for autism. Um, there is a really, really harmful and honestly barbaric um, treatment that's still being used, which is behavior modification, which is also called ABBA. But I do not condone it. It's cruel, and it's really just trying to get a neurotypical child to be like mask, really, into being normal or neurotypical. So
You mean
um,
a neurodivergent child to mask?
yes, sorry, yes, to get a neurodivergent child to act neurotypical. And all that does is, hurt the child's self-esteem, identity, and also feel like they're wrong. There's something wrong with them. They're disordered. It's not. It's not a disorder. So those type of therapies are very, very harmful. They also just prolong the stigma that there's something wrong with autistic people, that we should be fixed, or we should be we're wrong in some way. So we need to not do have certain behaviors, or so that autism is not really an issue for me. But look, anxiety can be a comorbid condition which can affect the social aspect. um, so anxiety, I think, is probably one of the biggest one that I've struggled with. um, and I mean, other than just therapy and probably a little bit of just propping myself up and being accepting of just the way that I am has actually helped. Just accepting myself as for who I am. If I can't interact on a certain day, or if I get exhausted from just being around people, I will just take myself out of that situation and just give myself some grace. I think that is the most important thing, is to know where your limits lie, to just be compassionate with yourself, and the rest is just
Yeah.
just most of the time we do social interactions for show, and so if it's not necessary, just don't do it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I and I forgot again.
Yeah. Look, I know, like with ADHD, a lot of people need to be medicated, so they may have to resort to going to their GP to get some stimulants so they can actually focus and things like that, which is totally acceptable. That's each person needs to know where, um, how much they can take, and how, if it's affecting them in a way that is negative, of course, like seek help and therapy and all of that. But I think if you can manage it on your own, I think um, that's probably the best way to start off with, and then just see how you go. My daughter, very high levels of anxiety, but most of those were due to uh, the external environment, uh, and once we sort of excluded those have, the anxiety has lowered a lot. So sometimes, yes, you can medicate it, but sometimes it can just be a band-aid to what the real problem is.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and I kind of remember what I was going to say, but kind of not. It was something because something you said made me think about what we were talking about with expectations and uh, how others expect us to be. Um,
Neurotypical?
yeah,
Yeah.
it was something about expectations and masking that I'm
Yeah.
forgetting now.
That's all right. It happens. It happens. Um, and like I was saying to you you asked me about, whether it's beneficial and things like that. Um, or you know treating autism or ADHD. Sometimes it's not actually the ADHD or the autism that's actually causing the issues. Like I said to you, it might have been external factors, environment. It might also be that you have a comorbid condition, which is a condition that happens with another condition. So you might have autism and anxiety disorder, autism and sensory processing disorder. You may have a developmental delay, intellectual disability, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, sensory processing, auditory processing disorder, mutism, dyspraxia. Then you've got physical genetic conditions such as heads, POTS, tuberculosis, Fragile X syndromes. And so, you might want to just be clear on what the actual thing that you want to um, be treated for is, because it may not necessarily be the autism or the ADHD. It may be these comorbid conditions that are happening at the same time. And, things like dyslexia, there are ways that you can get help with those things without having to be medicated for ADHD.
Right. And actually, speaking of that, the comorbidity and, being treated for a specific one, um, I do remember in one of the groups there was discussion about childhood trauma and ADHD, and that seems to be that goes together a lot, ADHD and childhood trauma. And so there was I actually saw, I didn't finish the whole video, but I saw a video recently, which I will find it and I will leave it linked in the description box below if anyone's interested in seeing that. But it was a licensed therapist and he was talking about ADHD and childhood trauma, and like where the overlaps lie and treatment for both.
That's right. And, in the comorbid also, we've got things like, anxiety, depression, OCD, gastrointestinal issues, epilepsy, sleeping disorders, and bipolar. And so you're looking at like a very complex, sometimes series of conditions that you may have, and then you might think that they all come from, the ADHD, not necessarily, or the trauma. I have CTPSD as well, complex trauma. Coming from a domestic violence home, it's just one of those things. But I can tell the difference between the two. I know when one thing is the trauma and the other thing is my ADHD or my autism. I don't see it as something that I can't separate. The fact that my short-term memory is compromised, yes, could be from trauma, but I guess it doesn't affect it doesn't affect me in the way that somebody just with trauma would. I it's a lot of little things, and I also see it especially because of my children, and so they haven't experienced the same trauma as I, but they still have those same genetic traits. Like they still display the traits that I could say come from trauma. So it's really hard, and I know like the jury's out because I've read a little bit about what the medical stance is on trauma versus ADHD, whether it's one thing or whether they're separate things. But for me, my trauma is different to my ADHD. It feels different to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have heard some people say that as well, that they can kind of tell when one symptom is from this versus their ADHD or something else. So
Yeah, it's tricky. And look, regardless of, I think, whether it is or it isn't, it's there. And at the end of the day, we have to be accepting of differences, whether they're genetic or whether they're environmental.
yeah,
It just is. And, we should be inclusive of that and not worry about where it comes from at the end of the day. I don't worry about my skin color. Like, well, whose skin color am I? Like, I am this person and I have this eye color and this hair color, and I just accept it as such.
yeah. Um, got a couple more comments. Fish says, "Yep, as well as autism, I have dyspraxia and dyscalculia. And then I also have depression and anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's definitely runs comorbid with other things. And I know for women, especially because ADHD presents and looks so differently in women, a lot of times we can be diagnosed with anxiety and depression instead of the ADHD.
Yes, that's what happened to my daughter. She was diagnosed with anything gastrointestinal, um, issues, reflux. I'm like, no, it's not reflux. So I had to go against a GP, a psychologist, a school counselor. I've had to go up against a lot of professionals, and just gone with my gut as to what the real issues are. And a lot of people, commonly get misdiagnosed with bipolar. Um, and it's not really that. It might be just the fact that you are neurodiverse, and you're going through a period of a lot of social anxiety or depression, and um, things get covered up, um, and then you don't really understand what's going on, and it keeps happening. And you can take all the medication in the world, but you're not going to change your neurology just because with medication it doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
And sometimes it's the wrong medication, so probably make you feel even worse.
that's true.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted I wanted to ask. I know earlier you were kind of talking about how autism is just a part of who you are, and it's part of you. And I've talked about this before. When it comes to the disability community, there's this interest in whether people want person first language or identity first language. And so I kind of wanted to see what your preferences were about that. So person first would be like, I have autism, whereas identity first, is I am autistic. Um,
Yeah, so For me, I am autistic. Because I cannot separate myself from my autism or my ADHD. It's part of who I am. You can actually see it in the way that I express myself, in the way that I live it day to day, with my sensory processing. Things are just heightened all the time, or whether it's, in a good or in a bad way, but it's always there. I can't just like switch it off and be like, oh yeah, I'm not autistic today. um, and for me, it's my culture. It's like my people. It's they get me, I get them. It's how my brain is. It's my neurology. It's how I'm wired. Um, it's evident in my personality traits, and my mental and my physical capabilities, in my morality, my ethics, my values. Um, and it's something that I live every day. And so, therefore, it's part of me. And I wouldn't want it any other way. I wouldn't want to detach myself from my neurodiversity. It's what I think gives me that bit of an edge and makes me that little bit special.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, it's not a negative thing. For me, it's not something that I should be ashamed of. It's actually something that I fully embrace, I fully accept, and I would like others to do the same.
Yeah. That's awesome. So that actually brings me to my next one, which is kind of like, why you started your business. So you created Awekids to promote inclusivity and diversity for kids who are neurodivergent or who have other physical and cognitive disabilities. But can you share like what inspired that idea?
Sure. So I think I've just always been very self-aware of myself and very observant of others. I think that's one of the autistic traits that um, I really love, because I get to really take in other people, um, just in a very gentle and in a very passive way, but without necessarily speaking to them. I watch them, and I know it sounds a bit creepy, stalkery almost, but it's not like that. It's just especially children, like how they express themselves, and um, the things that they do and what they enjoy. And so I think for me, and what they struggle with as well. So I think for me, having children opened up that world of, okay, what is going on with the children who are just not fitting in? What is going on with the children who are left out, who don't have friends, who feel like an outcast, who struggle at school, who are called the bad kids or the naughty kids? Why is that? Why there's got to be a reason. And I think I'm always very curious, and I want to know why. I ask lots of questions. I don't just stay with the one answer. I try to seek multiple um, um, ideals and feedback and all of that. So also, being a Latina, um, a child immigrant, also, being uh, brought up in domestic abuse, and being a neurodiverse individual, I think it gives me a broad view of what diversity looks like, what representation should look like, what's my personal experience and that of others, that we still need to promote more. We need to just make more mainstream. And that's what inclusivity is to me, like wanting to make everybody feel like they belong somewhere, that they have a place. As somebody who didn't feel like that when I was a child, I want to be able to help others to find the little the little space, and where they feel like, they can do things and go places, and they're not held back by others, and or what others um, decide for them. I want the children to be able to get out of that box and just smash through it, and
Yeah.
fulfill their potential. Just do what they want.
Yeah. That's awesome that you're doing that. Um, so I just have a couple more questions for you. And if anyone else has questions, if anyone's watching, we'll do a quick Q&A session here briefly. So if you have any questions, drop them in the chat box. But what are some stereotypes? I know you touched on this a little bit in the beginning, but what are some stereotypes do you think are out there about autism, ADHD, or just being neurodivergent that you think writers need to be aware of and be careful of?
Sure. So I think, generalizing, like thinking that everybody is going to be a certain way because they share a common neurology. Like we're all humans, we're all individuals, different backgrounds, different upbringings, different experiences. Some maybe different genders, different. It's just we're so diverse. We are so diverse, and we present differently as well because of external factors sometimes. But I think we are all on the spectrum for a reason, which means that we are all varied, and in the case of like autistics, we're often, or usually portrayed as prodigies, or on one end, and then on the other end, it's like we're just total hermits, and we don't participate in society, and we just cannot love or have a social life or anything like that. And often we don't know what empathy looks like, which is totally untrue. It's just a different version of what empathy commonly looks like. Whereas with ADHD, people are usually portrayed as volatile or undisciplined troublemakers, squirrel brains that we just can't focus or anything. And actually we have a lot of focus and potential with our hyper focus, so we just cannot fixate on the single or the one trait. We have to be open to speaking to the community, speaking to people who are neurodiverse, and getting their feedback. And with the sheet that I did for my way of listening, I actually went to the community, even though I am neurodiverse myself, even though my children are neurodiverse. I want to have a bigger voice, a more complete and wholesome view of what that looks like. So I think for anything like that, when you're trying to represent a group of people, you need to go out there and speak to more than just one or two people. It needs to be a voice. I think also, I think Sia had an issue recently with her movie where she did a representation of a friend of hers who was autistic, and he was nonverbal. So it got a lot of backlash because the only thing that she went on was some guidance from one organization who actually is against. I think they don't really, they want to fix autism, they want to get rid of autism. So she went to the wrong person. She went to the wrong organization to begin with, got the wrong advice, made this huge movie about representation for autistics, and it's just all wrong. It's all wrong, and it's just out there now, and there's nothing we can do about it. And it just adds to the stigma. It adds to the stereotype. I think we just have to be responsible. At first I was very afraid to do this, to get all kids up and running, because I thought, well, I don't have all the disabilities. I don't. At that stage, I think I didn't even know that I was autistic, but I knew that my daughter was. So I thought I need to do this for her, for other children. But it's intimidating to just put your voice out there to represent a whole group of people. So it's really important that you speak to as many people as you can and get different perspectives.
Right. And that's also why I started this live stream with that disclaimer. And I do that for all of these. It's like, you can't expect one person to be that voice or that representative for an entire group. There are things that you can learn and get from everyone's experience, but you want to make sure you do your research and you speak to as many people as possible to get a full picture.
Yeah, and look, there are a lot of online communities these days. Facebook, especially, is really good for that. Where they are actually autistic. So you want to go to actually autistic, which means that are people not necessarily that have been formally diagnosed, but who are actually living their disability. Because autism is still considered a disability, but it's dynamic, because it might be you might have a good day, the other day might not be so good. So it's really important to just reach out. People are always willing to educate others and to speak if people want to learn. Like
Mhm.
I've had that myself. I've just gone to the community, asked questions, and they're more than happy to help.
Yeah.
So I don't ever think that yes, it's not there. It's not, say, if somebody came up to me and be like, okay, educate me on autism. It's not like that. You shouldn't have to educate people if it's not our responsibility. But there are some people who are willing to help out. But don't expect everybody to be like a walking Google. Just look it up. Like everything's available online these days. Like anything that you need to know, just most of the stuff is Googleable. Is that even a word? I don't know.
Okay. Okay. So I have one last question, and then I'll look at the chat to see if there are any questions in there. Um, but my last question here is, are there any books or resources that you know of that can help writers who are trying to portray neurodivergent characters?
Yeah. So look, when I first started my journey on this educational, trying to understand what autism was, trying to understand what ADHD looks like past the stereotypical things that I knew about it. I went to actual autistic voices, which is, there's lots of Facebook groups out there. Autism inclusivity is one of them. They're really great there because the mods and everyone there are autistic. So you want to go to people who are actually autistic, not just like somebody who has children who are autistic, or because they'll be looking at it from a different lens. And even then they might be biased, even if they are neurotypical themselves, because it's ingrained, it's ingrained in our culture. So we need to also, there's a really great book. It's called The Reason I Jump, and it is narrated, if you want it audible, written by a person who is a young man who is autistic himself. Then you've got autism spectrum.org.au. There's Neuroclastic. Christy Forbes is really great for PDA profile autism, which is pathological demand avoidant. So that is also a different type of representation that autism can look like. And yeah, I think those are the ones that I've found most helpful. They're always very well researched. They've helped me a lot, like on my journey to understanding myself and my children.
Um, so those are great. Will um I will try to leave links for the ones you mentioned in the description box so people can check that out.
Mhm.
There are a couple questions I see here in the chat box. The first one is, I'm writing a lesbian romance novel and one of the women is autistic. How do I write her as smart without her looking like Sheldon Cooper and avoiding her character being infantilized as well?
Hmm. I think just make her human. Just, you
Yeah,
know, um, just don't go with the stereotypical biased, what you see on TV probably is not the best representation. Currently, there isn't really any great representation in the mainstream media. So I would just create a really wholesome, person who, you know, looks like anybody else, like you, like me. That's what we look like. I don't know. I have interests. I have hobbies. I'm part of the community. Part of. Um, I do dancing. It's just like it's just there's no specific. There's no one right way.
right.
It's yeah. So I just go with any average person, and they're autistic.
I would also say, for your character in your story, uh, if you are wanting to make them a real character, and not just like the token character in the story, look at what are what are their internal conflicts? What are their fears? What are their desires, their goals, their motivations? What obstacles are stopping them from getting their goals or their, their desires? So, looking at those things and working on your character arc for that character. So, how are they going to grow in this story? What do they have to learn or overcome? So, um, making them a real character would be part of it. Just looking at, you know, what what am I trying to do with this character? What are they trying to achieve? um, and what are things standing in the way. So pretty much, what they always tell writers on how to create a character, develop a character, take that and kind of work that into this character, um, as well, because I think the issue is most times when we see representation not done well, I feel like most times it's because they want to check off the diversity box. So they said, okay, we're going to have this character who is neurodivergent or who has a disability or whatever, but they didn't take the time to think about, okay, what does that character want? What are their desires and goals? What are their fears? What do they have to overcome? What do they need to grow and learn from? And they don't actually give that character a story. They just put them there to say, hey, we have a diverse character.
That's
So,
right. And look past the disabilities. Like we
right,
are not just our neurology, we're people, we're humans. We have, like you said, we have desires, we have goals, we have challenges, but
right,
not all of those alone come from our neurodiversity. Sometimes it's from society, sometimes it's from other people. So, um, yeah, just make us like a person.
Yeah,
And then maybe, add in little challenges which could relate back to our neurodiversity. But I don't think that you need to make that the focus necessarily.
right. And then this question says, one of my key characters may be on the spectrum, undiagnosed. She's either partially verbal or selectively mute. She serves as sort of a damsel in distress role. Can one do that respectfully? What do you
Hmm.
think about this?
I mean, I think you're going to have to work out why she's selectively or partially mute. Is there a reason? Is it just she's chosen this for? I mean, sometimes my daughter and I become selectively mute because I am overwhelmed. It's too much. I just need to lower the sensory aspects, and I just need to stop something, and so that I can um, get back to me. So it could be anxiety, it could be overwhelm, it could be anything. Like it could just be a choice to just not speak. So you're gonna have to find the reason, like you said, why is she doing that? It just cannot be just like you said, like a token, and just be like, oh, she's mute. Like okay. What
Yeah,
does that add to the story? Like really?
yeah, I would say thinking about what the purpose is for that.
Mm.
I also, I mean, it, this question, I'm like, when you say she serves as a damsel in distress role, I kind of wonder what exactly you mean by that, because I don't, I feel like even that, the damsel in distress, is not a is not a character that's well developed and has their own story, their own internal conflicts, and they basically just serve a role for the main character to be someone to rescue. And I don't really think that's a good thing. Having a character that's just there simply for the purpose of being rescued. But I would wonder her what is this character's role like? Does she play more of a role than just being someone for a character to rescue? Does she help the main character in some way to grow or change? Um, I would look at some of those things with this character. Um, she said her living doll is the MC, and she has a bit of a hero complex, especially when it comes to her playmate. She acts as her voice and advocate. The end will make parents are the end will make clear the parents are at fault. Um, So I'm not entirely sure, without knowing your story and knowing more about it, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by this. Um, yeah, but I would just say, for that character, think about what is the purpose they have um, for the role that you're trying to give them. And also, like Mariela said, why are they selectively mute? What's, thinking about what the reason is behind that. Okay. So those are all the questions I see right now. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Um, this has been awesome. It was great having you here, Mariela. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's it was anxiety inducing, but it was worth it.
I
Plus,
hope
I'm just coming out of COVID, so I'm pretty sure, regardless what happens, it's gonna go viral because I'm contagious.
well, I hope you're doing so much better. And I'm glad you were able to make it here with us today. I also wanted to, before we end off real quick, I wanted to share one more resource for you guys. I have it linked in the description box below. But in one of my Facebook groups for writers with ADHD, like Mariela said, there are a lot of Facebook groups where you guys can talk to people who are neurodivergent. But one of the writers in that group has a new book she's coming out with. I believe next month it comes out. So I wanted to share that with you guys. I'm going to pull up the cover here right now. You guys can see. It's called Talks Too Much, Candid Tale of Adult ADHD Diagnosis by Alana Reeves. And I believe in the book she talks about how she was diagnosed as an adult with ADHD, and kind of her experience with that and what she's learned. So that comes out in, like I said, I believe next month. Her website is linked below. She doesn't have pre-orders for this book, but if you sign up for her newsletter, you can be notified when the book is released if you want to get it. So that's another resource for you guys if you want more information and help with writing ADHD characters. And then my last announcement I wanted to make is I also have an online course called How to Write Diverse Characters. And right now I am having a promotion for the month of January since it's a new year. So if you sign up before the end of the month, before the 31st, you can use the coupon code New Year Goals 2022 to get 15% off the course. So if you want to learn more about writing diverse characters, you can definitely check out the course and use that code. So that is pretty much all I have for us today. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you, Mariela, for speaking with us.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone who commented as well and participated. I
Yeah,
hope it was helpful.
yes, I hope so too. So thank you so much, everyone. I will see everyone next month for another Write and Diversely interview.
Okay,
Bye.
see you then. Bye.